Thank you for the very kind and exaggerated words of introduction, which were read exactly as I wrote them. One of the most remarkable treasures of the Jewish people is what in Aleppo was called the Altej, or the Keter. Some Jews in Aleppo refer to it as Keter Ezra HaSofer, because they believe that this scroll of the biblical books was in fact written by none other than Ezra the scribe himself. In late rabbinic literature, the Aleppo Codex is always referred to as Keter Aram Tzova. Modern scholars, the first scholar to do this was Heinrich Gratz in Germany. Modern scholars call it the Aleppo Codex. One lecture cannot possibly do justice to what is arguably the single most important document that has been preserved by Jews for more than 1,100 years. Now, what I'd like to do instead this evening is to briefly describe the Aleppo Codex and then to present the vignette, which hopefully will capture some of the mystery, drama, and adventure that has accompanied the Aleppo Codex throughout its long journey through history. The vignette is designed to illustrate and to underscore some of the key issues that have led to controversy in and outside of Aleppo regarding the Aleppo Codex. Now, you have texts in front of you, and we're going to read those texts. I will translate those texts into English. So anybody here who has a problem with Hebrew, you'll hear me read it in English. Those who can read the Hebrew will be encouraged to read the Hebrew. I won't read the Hebrew here. Somewhere between the 7th and 11th centuries, a group of very highly specialized Jewish scholars called in Hebrew Balei HaMesorah, in English we say Masoretes, flourished in the land of Israel, in Eretz Israel, and in Babylonia. They devoted their lives to Scripture alone. I actually prepared many pages of history here, but I'm just going to skip over them, and while standing on one foot, I will tell you that before the rise of Islam, Jews were persecuted by Persians. They were persecuted in the Byzantine period by the Visigoths. Jewish literature was in disarray in the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries. Copies of the Bible were hard to come by. There were very few Jewish scholars in those centuries. And with the rise of Islam, it became possible for the first time, especially under certain caliphs who patronized literature. It was what's known as the Islamic Renaissance. And during that Renaissance, Jews were able to turn to literature. And one of the things they did was produce perfect texts like the Talmud, and they produced perfect texts of the Bible. They did this in part in response to the many manuscripts that had been destroyed during persecutions. They did this in part because Jews were forgetting how to read the Bible. The Bible, I hope you all realize, and you can raise your hand and ask me a question, because this is a small enough informal group that if you could stop me anywhere if something's not clear. The Bible contains only consonants. You're called up to the Sefer Torah. If you look at a Sefer Torah, it only has the Hebrew letters. It has no vowels. The Baal Koreh, the reader of the Torah, memorizes the correct pronunciation of the words, and he reads those words without vowel letters. There's no A, E, I, O, or U in Hebrew. There are also no musical notations in Hebrew. But you may read from the Torah only if you sing it properly, according to the official tune. Again, the Baal Koreh has memorized the tune. Well, before the 7th century, the precise pronunciation was not recorded. There was no system for recording vowel letters, what we today call kamat, patach, tzera, sego. Didn't exist. There was no system for recording musical notes. They didn't have mapach, pashta, zakef, katon, for those of you who read the Torah and so on. So basically it was memorized by heart. It's not as if we didn't know how to do it. Parents taught their children. This is how it was done. It was the oral tradition. done for hundreds and even thousands of years. But because of the persecutions by the 7th century, people were forgetting how to read the Torah, how to read all of Tanakh. And so just as, because of those persecutions and others like it, the rabbis decided to reduce to writing the oral traditions, and we call that the Mishnah. That was done around 200 of the Common Era. And just as in a later period, in the year 500, the rabbis reduced to writing the oral traditions about the Mishnah, which we call the Talmud. Until then, it was just oral traditions. They weren't recorded in books. They were known by heart. So, too, it became necessary, somewhere after the 7th century, to reduce to writing the correct pronunciation of the Hebrew Bible and the correct musical notation in order to chant properly readings from the Hebrew Bible. And so it was these experts, the Masoretes, between the 7th and 11th century, who devoted their entire lives just to this task. They lived in Babylonia, as I said, and they lived in 2 places in Eretz Israel, in Tiberias and Jerusalem. They invented signs for recording vowels. You know them now. Kamat, patach, tzera, segol. They invented those signs. They invented signs for recording musical notes. As I said, so pasuk et nachta, mapach pashta, zakef gadol, sokef katan, and so on. They collated the manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible all over the world in an effort to produce an accurate Bible. The most prominent family of Masoretes was the Ben Asher family. The founder, of course, his name was Rabbi Asher. They settled in Tiberias in Jerusalem, perhaps during the 8th century. The last and the greatest of this family of Masoretes was Rabbi Aharon ben Moshe ben Asher, who was active between the year 900 and 940 of the Common Era, first half of the 10th century. There are extant today hundreds of biblical manuscripts. You heard before by the people who introduced me about the persecutions and the problems Jews had in Aleppo, but they had it all over the world, of course. And what's amazing is when our mothers and fathers had to flee from one country to another, they didn't take their furniture with them. They took their manuscripts and their books. They took the holy writings. And so we have today, in the year 2000, we have hundreds of manuscripts from the medieval period of parts of Tanakh, of various biblical books. A few of those manuscripts include all of Tanakh, all of the books of the Bible. Very few, as I say, are complete Bibles, and only a handful of these manuscripts can be identified as being authentic Ben Asher manuscripts, manuscripts written by this family, the greatest of all the Masoretes. Now we're ready to look at passage 1, so I'm going to ask you to hold the page in front of you. And I'm going to only read these passages in English, as I say. Those of you who can read Hebrew, please read them in Hebrew. If you have any question, you can raise your hand. In a remarkable passage in the code of Maimonides, Rabbi Moshe Rabbi Maimon, Moses Maimonides, who of course you know is a great Sfaradi, who left Spain, left Cordoba, went to North Africa, and from North Africa he made his way ultimately to Eretz Israel and to Egypt. He settled in Egypt, where he lived throughout the second part of the 12th century. He died in the year 1204. He, of course, is the great eagle, the great author of the Mishneh Torah and the commentary on the Mishnah and the Moreh Nevuchim and so on. And in a passage in Maimonides' Code, which you have in front of you in passage 1, he wrote this passage around the year 1170. The Rambam informs us that he wrote a Sefer Torah. He wrote a scroll of the law. It is a special mitzvah incumbent on every Jew, as a matter of fact. So Rambam writes in his code, every Jew must write a Sefer Torah sometime during their lifetime. If you don't write one, you should support somebody who can write one. If you don't want to do that, you can buy books. Talmud, Torah, doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a Sefer Torah. But in the first instance, the preferable way to do the mitzvah is to write a Sefer Torah. And so the Rambam himself, of course, wrote a Sefer Torah. We wish we had it. We don't have it. It's lost. But he wrote a Sefer Torah. But in order to write a Sefer Torah properly, you must have a model. You must have another Sefer Torah from which you can copy. And there are many, many laws regarding how letters are written, how words are spelled, how paragraphs are formed. There's paragraphs in the Torah. And if you don't spell the word correctly, if you add one vav or one yud where it shouldn't be, if you don't have the paragraphs the way they should be, and so on, then your Sefer Torah is not kasher. It may not be used in a synagogue service. So Rambam said he began investigating Sifrei Torah, and more importantly, biblical manuscripts, hand-written manuscripts written by the Masoretes, which are vocalized. They have the Kamatz Patach Tzera. They have the musical notes. And those are model texts for how to write a Sefer Torah, even though in the Sefer Torah you don't put those notes. But you spell the words in the Sefer Torah, and you paragraph the paragraphs based on those Masoretic manuals. So Rambam says he began investigating Masoretic manuals, and lo and behold, he found that they were all in conflict with each other. There weren't two that were the same. He had no idea how he would write a Sefer Torah. How do you write a perfect scroll of the law? That's what he writes in that passage you have in front of you. I'm going to translate it now into English. Since I have seen great confusion in all the Torah scrolls in these matters, and all the Masoretes who wrote special treatises to make known which sections are open and which are closed, that's what's meant by paragraphing. An open paragraph means you end one paragraph on one line, and you begin the next paragraph on the next line. A closed paragraph means you end one paragraph at the beginning of a line, you leave 9 empty spaces, and then you start the next paragraph on the same line. And the Torah has lots of such paragraphs, and they may not be confused. If you have one open paragraph wrong or one closed paragraph wrong, the Sefer Torah may not be used in a synagogue service. I'm going back to my Maimonides text. They contradict each other, each manual based on the books that they based themselves. So I decided to write down here in my code all the paragraphs of the Torah and label which are closed and which are open. And I also decided to record in my code the form of the songs of the Torah. There are 2 major songs in the Torah. One is Az Yashir, the song of Moses and the Israelites after the splitting of the Red Sea, Az Yashir Moshe in Exodus. And the other is at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Parshat Ha'azinu, also referred to as Shirat Moshe. Those 2 songs are written differently in the Torah and in every Torah than all the narrative parts of the Torah. They are structured differently, they're poetic rather than prose, and unless you structure them properly and write them as a poem, your Sefer Torah is not kosher. The book on which we based ourselves, continues Maimonides, in these matters is the one known in Egypt, which contains the whole Bible, which was formerly in Jerusalem, where it was used to correct copies of Scripture. And everybody accepted it as authoritative, for Ben Asher corrected it many times, as we know from tradition. And I used that text as a basis for the Torah scroll, which I wrote according to Jewish law. So clearly Maimonides in Egypt had discovered a Ben Asher text, one that was already reputable during the lifetime of Maimonides, even before, as it were, Maimonides gave it his blessing. Maimonides tells you in this passage, the reason I selected it is because it was world famous. Everyone used this text to correct their Torah scrolls. And this was the text that was corrected again and again throughout his lifetime by Ben Asher. So this was a Ben Asher text. From the middle of the 14th century until September 1957, that is, for a period of some 600 years, the Aleppo Jewish community claimed that the original Ben Asher text that Maimonides used, and that's described in this passage, was in Aleppo. This is the famous Aleppo Codex. In 1957, as you heard, when the Aleppo Jewish community could no longer safeguard its treasure, the Aleppo Codex, at the behest of Rabbi Moshe Tawil, was smuggled out of Aleppo by Mordechai Facham, as you heard, was brought to Turkey, and from Turkey he was brought to Israel. And in February 1958, the Aleppo Codex was presented to Yitzchak Ben Tzvi, at the time president of the State of Israel. The Aleppo Codex is today preserved in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Now we come to the vignette. One of the greatest Bible scholars of modern times was the late Professor Umberto Cassuto. Umberto, his Hebrew name was Moshe David. Umberto Cassuto was born in 1883 and he died in 1951. He was born in Florence, Italy. He was ordained by the Rabbinical Seminary in Florence, a very distinguished seminary, and later he became its director. He also served as rabbi, even separate from that. He was also appointed professor of Hebrew language and literature at the University of Florence. In the later stage, he served as professor at the University of Rome. He was a distinguished scholar of Italian Jewish history, and he was a Bible scholar of international repute. In 1939, he was appointed professor of Bible at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, probably the hardest place in the world to be appointed professor of Bible. I meet many people who are still in a state of depression because they were never appointed professor of Bible at the Hebrew University. In the early 1940s, the Zionist leadership of Palestine at the time, and the president of the Hebrew University, an American-born great Jew from San Francisco, his name was Professor Judah Magnus, and a group of distinguished scholars at the Hebrew University gathered together and began a project called Mifal HaMikra, the Bible Project. And their goal was to produce a perfect copy of the Hebrew Bible. A perfect copy by Jews, not by Christians and not by missionaries, but a perfect copy of the Hebrew Bible, once and for all. And they appointed, as head of the project, Professor Umberto Cassuto, the newly appointed professor of Bible at the Hebrew University. Professor Cassuto, of course, began gathering manuscripts from all over the world. And since Maimonides had selected that codex in Egypt as his model, it had the blessing of Maimonides. And since in the early 1940s it was in Aleppo, it was decided by this committee that they would print their new edition of the Bible on the basis of the Aleppo Codex. But the committee was in Jerusalem, and the Aleppo Codex was in Aleppo. And this was World War II. And Jews and Arabs with much tension between them. It was not a simple matter to arrange for the Jews in Jerusalem to study the Aleppo Codex. Despite many requests, letters went from Jerusalem to Aleppo, begging the Jewish community in Aleppo to please send the Aleppo Codex to Jerusalem so that the great scholars at the Hebrew University could read it at their leisure, copy it, and then print it so that all Jews would have a copy. The Jewish communal officials, and I'm speaking in their praise, who had been guarding that scroll for 600 years, said, "We're not giving it up." And they wouldn't allow that scroll to leave Aleppo and be sent to Jerusalem. On the opening page of the Aleppo Codex, which is now lost, but it was copied before it was destroyed, there's a line which reads, "Baruch Shomro, Ve'arur Gonvo, Ve'arur Mochro, Ve'arur Memashkeno, Lo Yimacher, Ve'lo Yigael Lo'olam Va'ed." A warning on the Aleppo Codex, which said, "Blessed are those who guard this codex. Cursed is anyone who steals it, anyone who sells it, anyone who uses it to secure a loan, or any purpose. This scroll will remain in Aleppo and may not leave Aleppo. It may not be sold. It cannot be redeemed, which means somebody will donate $1 million to the Aleppo synagogue so that the codex can be sent to Jerusalem. Can't do it. Nothing can be done. It shall remain in Aleppo." Moreover, there was a tradition in the community, and make no mistake about it, the Aleppo community was a superstitious community. There was a tradition in the community that the day the codex would be removed, from the Aleppo synagogue would be the day of the dissolution of Aleppo's Jewish community. 3 delegations were sent from Jerusalem in 1943 alone to Aleppo. The first delegation arrived in July of 1943. This delegation was prepared to accept the Aleppo Codex as a gift to the national Jewish homeland. If that wasn't possible, it offered to buy the Aleppo Codex. And if that wasn't possible, it wished to borrow the Aleppo Codex. The goal was to get it to Jerusalem. The answer of the Jewish communal officials, you can already guess, was a resounding no. A second delegation was sent in September 1943. They already got the report from the first delegation. So they asked for permission to photograph the entire codex. 1943, that wasn't a problem. Damascus, Aleppo, even in Aleppo, there were photographers who could have photographed. Or at the very least to allow a complete copy to be made, a hand copy of the entire Aleppo Codex. You can guess again, the answer of the Jewish communal officials in Aleppo was no. They will not allow a photograph of the Aleppo Codex. They agreed, however, after much discussion and negotiation, that if Jerusalem wants to send a scholar to look at it, they'll allow the scholar to look at the Aleppo Codex. And so a third delegation arrived in Aleppo in December 1943, and the head of this delegation was Professor Umberto Cassuto himself. Now, as I told you, Umberto Cassuto was a very distinguished rabbi. And as a rabbi, he was greeted very warmly upon his arrival in Aleppo. But as a scholar, he was professor at the Hebrew University, he was treated with great suspicion. And when he explained to the Kehillah officials that he had come to examine the Aleppo Codex, on the first day that he came to Aleppo, December 12th, 1943, he was informed by the officials that, of course, he could examine the Codex, but for exactly 15 minutes. And then he must return to Jerusalem. Not one to despair, I never met Professor Cassuto died in 1951. He must have been a remarkable man. Cassuto spent his entire first week in Aleppo negotiating with the Vad HaKehillah. And he prepared speeches. We have his notes. Every day he made a speech to the Kehillah, explained to them the importance of Tanakh, the importance of the project, the importance of the Aleppo Codex, and why it couldn't be done without the Aleppo Codex, and so on and so forth. And he finally gained permission. He planned to stay 1 week entirely. Took the first week to get permission. And by the end of the week, he had gained permission to examine the Codex for as long as he wished. But only on the following conditions. 1, 2 rabbis had to be present every time he was in the room looking at the Codex. The entire time that he was looking at the Codex. The Shamash, the Shamus of the Aleppo Beit Knesset Hagadol, it was called the Beit Knesset of Yoav ben Tzruya. It was called Beit Knesset HaZahav, the Yellow Synagogue. The Shamus had to be present also whenever Professor Cassuto looked at the Aleppo Codex. And 3, no camera would be allowed in the room, and he would be searched when he entered the room and when he left the room. And under those conditions, he was able to look at the Codex for 5 days, each day from 8:30 in the morning until 1 p.m. So he actually saw the scroll 5 times, 5 different days, for 4.5 hours each day. He could stay no longer. He had to return to Jerusalem, and he did. He arranged with a local rabbi in Aleppo, Hechacham Rabbi Yehuda Ataya, that he would leave with Rabbi Ataya a long list of queries, what it is that he wanted to know about the Aleppo Codex that he hadn't been able to do in the 5 days that he was there. And Rabbi Ataya would mail him the responses to Jerusalem. Upon his return to Jerusalem in the end of December 1943, and until his death in 1951, Cassuto published almost nothing about the Aleppo Codex. In 1946, however, a sample edition of the Mifal HaMikra of the Bible Project was published, the first sample of the new critical edition of the Hebrew Bible. They published Sefer Yonah, the book of Jonah. And it appeared with an introduction. And please look at passage 2 now, and there you have part of the introduction. The introduction, of course, was written in the third person by Umberto Cassuto. And in translation, what the introduction really says is, we didn't use the Aleppo Codex as the main manuscript for our new edition of the Bible. We used a different codex, a Ben Asher manuscript in Egypt. But the paragraph that you have in front of you reads in English, admittedly, it is widely believed that the manuscript upon which Maimonides relied was the great Keter, the crown of Aaron ben Moses ben Asher, who wrote between 900 and 940, as I told you, in the first half of the 10th century, now preserved at Aleppo. However, a thorough examination of the Keter by the above-mentioned director, meaning by me, Umberto Cassuto, who visited Aleppo for this purpose in 1943, made it quite clear to him that this view is wrong. This was published by Cassuto in 1946. The Aleppo Codex was not the codex that Maimonides used. That was his conclusion. He was the only great Bible scholar who ever saw the Aleppo Codex. And that was his conclusion. On Saturday, November 29, 1947, what happened? Who remembers? That's right. Very good. On Saturday, November 29, 1947, the United Nations voted for partition. Immediately afterwards, riots broke out in various Arab countries, and particularly in Syria and in Aleppo. Synagogues and Torah scrolls were burned to a crisp, including the main synagogue of Aleppo, where the Aleppo Codex was kept under lock and key. When the first reports of the riots, the December riots, reached Eretz Yisrael, Palestine, it was assumed that the Aleppo Codex had been destroyed. And in January 1948, Professor Umberto Cassuto published a eulogy in memory of the Aleppo Codex. It was published in Haaretz. And you don't have the opening line, but you have the key passage in front of you, which is now passage 3, so please look at that. But I just want to read the opening line, and I'll translate it as well. It's a beautiful line. This is what he wrote in January 1948. Im hayidiyot shenitparsemu b'yitonot matimot le'emet, if the newspaper accounts are true, hatanach hamefursam, that great Bible, shaya pe'er hakila, the glory of the Jewish community of Halep, of Aleppo, hatanach shelefi hamisoret tishtamesh bo harambam, that Tanakh which tradition says Maimonides used, batzmo v'chodo, hayal lema'cholet esh, it was fuel for the fire, bipraot shepartzu neged Yehudei Halep, in the riots against the Jews in Aleppo, with Nei Shavuot Achadim a few weeks ago. Keter Aram Tzova, the Altej, Moshe Yuregilim Lechanoto, Avad Ve'inenu. The great scroll of Aleppo no longer exists. And so he wrote about it in Haaretz, described it, because he had seen it. He had been there. And as you can see in passage 3, and I'm just going to translate it into English, one usually assumes that the book upon which Maimonides relied was the Aleppo Codex. Ostensibly, this seems likely enough. A cursory glance at it would look like it's surely what he used. Yet I permit myself to doubt it for technical reasons, which this is not the place to set out in detail. It was a newspaper, Haaretz. Haaretz was not where Cassuto was going to prove to the world that the Aleppo Codex was not used by Maimonides. Now, I repeat, Cassuto is the greatest Bible scholar who ever looked at the Aleppo Codex. He was the last scholar to examine the Aleppo Codex in its entirety. So his opinion must be taken seriously, yet during his lifetime, he never explained why he was so certain that Maimonides had not used the Aleppo Codex. And indeed, as late as 1960, a great professor who was a friend of mine, Professor the late Moshe Goshen Gutstein, a great Masoretic scholar in Israel, wrote an article where he wrote the following line: "What a pity that Cassuto's technical reasons were never set out elsewhere. The man died, and he made a claim which he never proved." But after Cassuto's death, an entry he wrote for Encyclopedia Mikra'it, the Bible Encyclopedia, a very great work of which he was the editor. It was published posthumously in 1954. And there he provides one reason, for the first time, one reason why he felt that the Aleppo Codex was not the codex that Maimonides had used in Egypt. So if you would now take a look at passage 4, and I will explain as best I can in English what it says. It's very brief, doesn't say a lot. He's talking about the Ten Commandments. Remember I told you about the paragraphing. Well, within the Ten Commandments there is paragraphing. In fact, every one of the Ten Commandments begins as a separate paragraph. And then he says as follows. One of the Ten Commandments, of course, is Lo Tachmod. And very famous verse, Exodus 20, in some Bibles it's verse 14, others it's verse 15, 16, or 17. In Exodus 20, in the Ten Commandments, the verse reads, Lo tachmod et beit reyecha, you shall not desire, you shall not covet your friend's house. Lo tachmod eshet reyecha, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And now what it says here in passage 4 is, regarding that verse, the paragraph in middle of that verse, the break in middle of that verse, which we find in many manuscripts, and in the Aleppo Codex. He saw the Aleppo Codex. Exodus is gone. It was burned in the fire. That's what happened to it. We don't have Exodus anymore. But he saw it. And he says that in Exodus, in the Ten Commandments of the Aleppo Codex, there was a paragraph in the middle of the verse. There's a paragraph, and then the first beginning of the verse begins Lo Tachmod, and before the second Lo Tachmod, there's another paragraph, a break in the middle of the verse, empty space. That's how it is in the Aleppo Codex, and that's how it is in many manuscripts. This breaks the verse into two. But Maimonides said there's no break in the verse. And that's how Maimonides ruled in his code. Now, Maimonides said he used the Aleppo Codex. He did everything exactly as it was in the Aleppo Codex. Maimonides said there's no break in the verse. And here we have testimony by Professor Cassuto. There was a break in the verse. So there we have our first sense of what troubled Umberto Cassuto. In the Aleppo Codex, Deuteronomy verse 32, chapter 32, verse 1 on, we have the Song of Moses, Ha'azinu, Shamayim V'adaber. Beautiful song, and as I already told you, songs have to be structured differently. Otherwise your sacred Torah is not kasher. And in the Aleppo Codex, the Song of Hazinu is written in 67 lines. The entire song, in 67 lines. The first word of each one of the 67 lines is obvious to the naked eye as you look at the Aleppo Codex. Then each verse is divided in half, as I told you. There are hemisticks, so we know what the first word is of the second half of each verse. The Rambam, Maimonides in his code, rules that the Song of Moses should be written in 70 lines. And he lists the first word of every one of the 70 lines. It's not the same as the Aleppo Codex. And so now take a look on the page that I have in front of you, passage 5. Page 2 now, passage 5. And this was just discovered fairly recently. People now are looking. And they've examined the Magnus archives, the letters of Judah Magnus, letters that he received. In the Magnus archives in Jerusalem, they found a letter from Cassuto to Magnus dated December 22nd, 1946. And look what it says in the middle. I underlined it for you, those of you who can read the Hebrew. If you can't read the Hebrew, I'm simply going to translate it into English. He said, based on my investigation, I found differences, very important differences, between the Aleppo Codex and Maimonides' Code. And now he tells us what some of them are. For example, with regard to the division of the Ten Commandments, I already explained that to you. And now we add something that we never saw before, and with regard to the number of lines of the Song of Moses in Parshat Hazin. And I explained that to you now. And look at passages 6 and 7. For those of you who read Hebrew, there you have Maimonides' Code right in front of you. In passage 6, what it says is, in effect, it lists the breaks in the Ten Commandments. And after the word, second line, middle of the second line, it says, Kabed, lo tirtzach, lo tin'af, lo tignov, lo taneh, lo tachmod, kulan stumot. These are all paragraphs, closed paragraphs, and you add them up and there are 6. Maimonides' text says there are 6 closed paragraphs. But in the Aleppo Codex there are 7. Because aside from these 6 which are there, the verse lo tachmod itself is broken into 2 parts with a new paragraph in the middle of the verse before the second word lo tachmod. And they add up to 7, not 6. Again in passage 7, here you have Maimonides' Code, and you can see the words as clear as daylight. Maimonides says you have to write the Song of Moses a certain way, and the third line that you have here, it says V'kot v'notah v'shivim shitot. You write it in 70 lines. And I have to tell you, for those who want to know halakha, that Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Mechaber, in the Shulchan Aruch, rules that you must write this song in 70 lines, and all Sifrei Torah of Ashkenazim and Sfaradim today are written in 70 lines. But the Aleppo Codex has 67 lines. I don't want you to leave here unhappy, so... What? No, the 70 lines were collapsed into 67 broader lines, which means automatically that the first words are not going to be the same. They can't be the same. Right?
That didn't burn, did it?
No, I have it right here with me. I knew you were going to ask that. Okay. Yes. All right. Let me tell you what really happened. Now, this is amazing. Now, Professor Cassuto was a very wise man. There's no question about it. And he left Jerusalem, came to Aleppo. He knew he was going to look at the Aleppo Codex. So you can imagine, he prepared. He didn't come with a suitcase with 3 suits and 12 shirts. He came with a suitcase with manuscripts. He came with a suitcase with Maimonides' Code. Because he knew exactly what he was going to do. He was going to sit with Maimonides' Code in one hand, and with the Aleppo Codex in front of him, he was going to compare every letter, every word, every halakha, and find out once and for all that this is the code that Maimonides used. And you already hear the results of his investigation. And by the way, I now have to tell you, whereas he published nothing in his lifetime, it turns out, now that they made search, that he wrote extensive notes, and we have them. They've just been discovered. Extensive notes. It is unbelievable what this man did in 5 days. Most of us in a year wouldn't accomplish what this man did in 5 days. Absolutely unbelievable. Pages and pages of notes, and thank God he wrote those notes, because he wrote notes on Bereshit, Shemot, all of which is lost today. We don't have it anymore. Without his notes, we wouldn't know it's in the Aleppo Codex. It's amazing. But those notes he never published. They were hidden away, and just recently, recent years, they've been discovered and published. Now, what apparently happened is the following. Professor Umberto Cassuto came to Aleppo, and he brought with him a Rambam. Why not? Hilchot Sefer Torah. The second book of the code is called Sefer Hava. In Sefer Hava, there's a section called the laws of how you write a Sefer Torah. And of course, he brought that section with him. And you can take any printed edition you want. He had a printed edition with him, and I Xeroxed some passages from that edition for him. And it says exactly what you have printed in front of you. And so he could only conclude what he concluded. And he found those 2 glaring discrepancies that I mentioned. What Cassuto didn't realize was that all the printed editions of Rambam are erroneous. It's not what Rambam wrote. We have manuscripts of the Mishneh Torah. Now, we don't have Rambam's original Mishneh Torah. I wish we did, but we don't have it in his own hand. But we are very lucky. First of all, we have a few passages. There are a few little paragraphs that turned up in the Karov Niza of the Mishneh Torah, but not our passages. But we have a copy of Mishneh Torah and only Sefer Mada and Ava, only the first two books. But it's the second book that has Hilchot Sefer Torah. It's a miracle. We have a copy, a handwritten manuscript of Mada and Ava written in the lifetime of the Rambam, with the Rambam's autograph on it. And so now I ask you to look at passage 8. And anybody can see the first line that I put on passage 8. This is Huntington manuscript in Oxford University in England. We have a manuscript of the Mishneh Torah, 2 whole books, including Hilchot Sefer Torah, at the end of which we have Maimonides' autograph. And it says, Huga mi-sifri. This manuscript was corrected against my original. Ani Moshe Berevi Maimon. Signed Maimonides. That's pretty good. So now we have a text that was compared to the original text of Maimonides, which is lost. And in passage 8, I Xerox for you the Huntington manuscript, and we're going to read it together. And I'll just translate the key part in English. It begins with Vayedaber. This is the 10 Commandments. This is where Maimonides in his code lists. You can go up to passage 6 if it's easier for you to read it in 6. Vayedaber den Anochi lo tisa shloshtam stumot. The first 3 paragraphs in the 10 Commandments are closed paragraphs. Zachor ptucha. The next, on the Zachor at Yom HaShabbat, right before the word Zachor, there's an open section. Now look at what the key part. Kabed lo tirtzach lo tinaf lo tignov lo taneh lo tachmod, and there's a little caret on top of lo tachmod. That little caret means that the scribe realized he left out a word. And what do you see on the side? Turn it sideways. What do you see? Anybody help me out? Lo tachmod, another lo tachmod. And you know that that's the right reading because kulam stumot. All these are closed paragraphs. Vehain sheva. And they add up to 7. The only way you get 7 if you have 2 lo tachmods. So the Rambam had 2 closed paragraphs, 2 exactly like the Aleppo Codex. The Rambam did have the Aleppo Codex in front of him. We go to the next passage, passage 9. We saw the problem that Cassuto had, as he told us openly in that letter. Cassuto had a problem with Ha'azinu. In the Aleppo Codex, it's 67 lines, and the Rambam writes it has to be 70. Well, look what it says. Tzurat Shirat Ha'azinu. You can compare if you have a problem reading the Hebrew of 9 with passage 7. Tzurat Shirat Ha'azinu Kol Shita V'Shita Yesh Be'emtza'a Revach. Every line of the song has a break in the middle. Revach Echad Kitzurat HaParsha HaStuma. It has 9 empty spaces. V'nimtzeit Kol, and there's the caret again, you left out a word. V'nimtzeit Kol Shita. Every line is divided. Chalukah L'shtayim. Every line in the song is divided into 2 lines. V'kotvin and how many lines are there to be in the poem? Kotvin V'sheva V'shishim Shitot. 67 lines. There's only one Bible manuscript in the world from the lifetime of Maimonides or from before Maimonides that has exactly 67 lines in the Shira of Hazinot, the Aleppo Codex. And that part of the Aleppo Codex is still here, and I put a photograph of the page in front of you. I didn't put all 67 lines, but since I know that this is a room filled with doubters, I have a copy of the Aleppo Codex with me, and you can come up and count the lines, and you will see there's 67.
So why did they put 7?
Very good question is asked. So why does the printed editions of Maimonides read 70? I'll tell you why. Because it is incredible that there are 67 lines in Parshat Ha'azinu, because in early rabbinic literature, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Tosefta, in all the rabbinic literature, nowhere does it say that it should be 67 lines. We have only one Braita in all of Jewish literature that tells us how many lines are to be in the Parsha of Ha'azinu. It is in Masechet Sofrin, and there it says 70 lines. And most manuscripts have 70 lines. And most Sitrei, all Sifrei Torah, he followed the Aleppo Codex, and he wrote 67 lines. When printing wasn't, this is the 12th century, right? Printing was invented. When? My students know when was printing invented? All right, Johann Gutenberg, 15th century. The first book was printed in Mainz. So in the 15th century, well, when printing was invented, And the first Maimonides code was printed. Printing was done in Europe. In Europe, all the Ashkenazim had 70 lines. And most Sephardim had 70 lines too, as a matter of fact. So when they saw that Rambam said 67 lines, they said, it's a mistake. Can't be right. They crossed it out and they put in 70 lines. And every printed edition reads 70 lines. But this copy, signed by the Rambam, says 67 lines. Because the Rambam had the Aleppo Codex in front of it. There are many legends about the Aleppo Codex. I'm just going to sum up now because I kept you long enough. There are endless legends about who wrote the Aleppo Codex, about how it was preserved, that it was really written by Ezra the scribe, as I indicated, and so on. There's no need for legend. There's no need for exaggeration. Rabbi Aaron, Rabbi Moshe ben Asher devoted an entire lifetime to producing the one perfect Bible that's ever been produced. He succeeded. This Bible was taken captive, by the way, during the Crusades by Christians. It was brought to Egypt, and the Jews in Egypt ransomed this codex at a huge expense, and it was there available for Rambam when he wrote his Code of Law. It was preserved by the Jewish community in Egypt for 250 years. From Egypt, as I told you, in the 14th or 15th century, it made its way to Aleppo, and in Aleppo it was preserved for some 600 years. And the Jews of Aleppo were the guardians of the Keter. They preserved it. They did this at great personal risk, and at even greater personal risk. It was smuggled out of Aleppo under the eyes of the Syrian forces. It was brought safely to Eretz Yisrael in 1958. The truth about the Aleppo Codex is more riveting than any legend about its origin. And the truth about the Aleppo Codex is more riveting than any imaginary retelling of the story. Thank you very much.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yes.
How come they didn't let him photograph it?
Sorry?
How come the chief rabbi of
Stand up, stand
Aleppo,
up.
why didn't they?
Yeah. Why wasn't it allowed to be
Yeah,
photographed?
it must be a case of wood on that too.
Yeah, I could probably guess. As a matter of fact, Cassuto writes in his notes that when he came, and he also requested that they photograph it. He already knew that they rejected it in the past, but he had a very good argument. And they said no. And as soon as they said no, he pulled out from his pocket photographs of the Aleppo Codex. Some pages were photographed, and they were available in 2 books. Thank God, because actually all the pages that were photographed previously are pages that we no longer have. So thank God we have the photograph. I have actually with me some of those photographs.
They weren't photographed.
No, be very careful. It sounds like it. Selected pages were photographed, and they were photographed by missionaries. How those missionaries got it, I don't know. Who gave them permission? Whether it was the government forces who forced the Jews to hand it over to be photographed. Whatever it was, actually more pages were photographed than have so far been recovered. But approximately 3 pages are recovered. We know that another 3 pages were photographed. Nobody can find the photographs. They're looking right now for them while I speak. So several pages were photographed, and I'm sure because those pages were used by missionaries, I'm guessing now, I shouldn't say I'm sure. If I had to guess, the community was not too happy when they were forced to have photographs made, and for whatever reason, they would not allow photographs made. They said you can come in and copy the entire Aleppo Codex, but no photographs. They didn't allow it. Now, Baruch Hashem, and by the way, it didn't end in Aleppo. I said there was a lot of controversy, as you might imagine. After the scroll was brought to Israel, it was a huge controversy involving many members of the Aleppo community in Israel, in the United States, and elsewhere, in terms of to whom did this scroll belong. There were people who were very upset that it was brought to the government of Israel, for whatever reason. Some people said it's ours. There were still rabbis alive from Aleppo who said it should have been brought to us. We now have the shuls of Aleppo in Israel, in America, etc. Why is this being handed over to? This is a holy scroll. What's in a museum? So there was much negotiation. There was a din Torah, if you really want to know, and long over many years. And there was a settlement, and a settlement signed by many, many great rabbis. The upshot of which was that it would remain in Israel. it would forever remain in the hands of, it was supposed to be in the hands of Machon, what's called Machon Yad Tzvi. Machon Yad Tzvi in Rehavia, and it was actually there for a while. They realized that they couldn't provide for sufficient security for such a great manuscript. And so it was brought to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, to the Sifriya HaLeumit, and now to the Israel Museum, where there is appropriate security and the proper temperature and so on to preserve a scroll such as this scroll. There are great scholars now publishing wonderful articles on the parchment, what kind of parchment, the ink, what the ink was made out of, the script, you name it. They just scientists just tested it and found that there were no burns on the Aleppo Codex. It was not burnt in the fire, apparently. There are what look like burns, and they tested them, and it turns out it's a fungus. And there's a fungus that's eating up the Aleppo scroll. They know exactly what it is, but not fire. Which raises hope that the missing pages of the Aleppo Codex, very briefly, I didn't want to mention this because I didn't mention there were originally over 480 pages in the Aleppo Codex. The Aleppo Codex is written on parchment, and it is bound as a book. That's why it's called a codex. 480 pages. Of the 480, there are only 295 extant today. Almost the whole Torah is missing. Most of the Megillot are missing. There's beginning and end is missing. It may well be that there are Jews in the community here or elsewhere who have pages, who may not even know what they have, but have pages of the Aleppo Codex. So everyone is searching and hoping that somehow they might be able to restore the missing pages. But if they can't restore them, the second best thing will be the notes of Umberto Cassuto. Yes?
When they test the paper,
Right.
are they able to tell the age of the paper?
They should. For some reason, I don't know why, and I have it in my own notes. I said, why don't they have a carbon-14 testing of the Aleppo Codex? It's never been done. I don't know. It really doesn't have to be done. As I say, there's no doubt about the antiquity of the scroll. There's no doubt that Maimonides had it in front of him. And in any event, the claim is that it was written in the 10th century. I am certain it'll come out, but they should have it. I agree with you 100%. I actually have it in my notes, and I write to myself a note that every time I go to Jerusalem, when I meet the authorities there, to remind them they should have a carbon-14 testing. And I always forget when I get to Jerusalem. So, but I agree, it should be done. But I want to tell you something else. We know the name of the scribe who wrote it, and we know that Ben Asher, the last of the great Ben Ashers, and the greatest of the Ben Ashers, Aaron Ben Asher, wrote the Mesorah, vocalized it, and corrected the text. I just want to tell you this. The scribe who wrote this scroll also wrote many other scrolls. We have other scrolls of his. And those, many of them are dated. We know exactly when he lived. They were all written between 900 and 940. So there's almost no, and this is the exact same handwriting, as you can test handwriting. This is the handwriting of the scribe who wrote other scrolls that are dated between 900 and 940.
So 99% you would say it's not Ezra?
It's not Ezra. Not 99%, 100%. It's not Ezra. It's vocalized. It is vocalized. It has Tzeireh Kamatz Patach. There is no document in the world, including the Dead Sea Scrolls, that has Kamatz Patach Tzeireh before the 7th century of the Common Era. Can't you? Yes.
When halakha is corrupted, and proved to be corrupted, why is there a move to go back to the original?
Oh, there is. Glad you raised it. No, be careful when you say halacha is corrupted. We can correct the text of Maimonides. There is a Braita in Mesechet Sofrim that says there should be 70 lines in the Shirah. Today we all have 70 lines. When I say we, Ashkenazim and Sfaradim, including the Aleppo Jewish community, they all have 70 lines, but the Aleppo Codex has 67. All Teimanim have 67 lines, because they follow the old manuscripts of the Aleppo Codex. Yemenite Jews. No, they differ from us. They have their Torah scrolls are far closer to the Aleppo Codex for a simple reason. They followed the manuscript of Maimonides, which they preserved. So they follow Maimonides exactly. And as a matter of fact, they don't follow the Aleppo Codex exactly either, but I can't blame them entirely, because they had a copy of Maimonides' code, so they follow Maimonides' code. But there are many things in the Aleppo Codex that Maimonides never recorded. You can be sure he put them into his Sefer Torah. Certain strange shapes of certain letters and so on and so forth. He didn't mention them. The Yemenites know how to write a Sefer Torah from Maimonides' code. Maimonides didn't mention it. It's not incorporated in the Yemenite scrolls. Now that we have the Aleppo Codex, and by the way, what I was trying to say before, sorry for the discursive nature of this, but part of that agreement, after many court visits by representatives of Israel and Aleppo and so on, was that the Aleppo Codex would be photographed. And a certain amount of copies would be given for free to the Aleppo Jewish community. And by golly, if you didn't get them, make sure you get them. That's part of the agreement. Read the small print of the agreement. But the agreement was that it would be printed, and it was printed in a magnificent text. I'm the only person in the world who doesn't mind that we lost part of the Aleppo Codex, because I can't carry this. How much is this? This is exact size. What the Aleppo Codex is wonderful, and this includes the Shira of Hazinu, so you can see exactly what it looks like. This is the 295 pages that we still have. We're missing the rest. Now it's available, and now of course anybody who wants to.
How much is this?
I'm not in the book. It runs to around $500. It is a magnificent volume, and it is available. They printed 2,000 copies, 1,000 or 2,000 copies. They haven't sold 200.
Where is it available from?
In Magnus Press in Jerusalem.
Magnus?
Magnus Press in Jerusalem. So we're very happy to say
They
that.
should be
Connected to that guy?
The press's name is on. Magnus was the first president.
Any other questions? You want to put that down?
Yosef Karo, did he mention anything?
There will be a search before anyone leaves tonight.
Do we photograph it?
Yosef Karo, does he mention anything about the Sofer?
No, Rabbi Yosef Karo never saw the Aleppo Codex, for sure, and Rabbi Yosef Karo only followed the tradition of 70 lines. He followed...
He never mentioned that the Rambam had used it or any...
Oh, he knows that, but his reading of the Rambam was 70 lines.
I mean,
He doesn't mention 67 lines at all. Nobody, as a matter of fact, says a word about the 67 lines until a much later period when scholars went. I'll just tell you briefly what is true is people knew about the Aleppo Codex, but who could get to Aleppo? You know, the Ramah was in Krakow. Everybody, they all knew about the Aleppo Codex. There was no way to get to Aleppo. And there are Jews, believe it or not, through the 19th century. We have records at least from the 16th century on in every century of Jews who did make the trek, Jews who left Lithuania. And incredible expense, carrying a Bible with them for one reason. Their whole life's goal was to get to Aleppo to see the Aleppo Codex. Most didn't make it. A few made it. We know their names. And by the way, they're very important because those few who made it then published Shelot Shuvot, or little records for us, and told us what they saw at the Aleppo Codex. And one of the things they saw was 67 lines. See, so we have other evidence for it by those few people who made it to Aleppo and testified, and that's very important. But Rabbi Yosef Karo was not one of them. Okay, and he ruled halakha, and as I say, the halakha today is 70 lines.
You know, the Aleppo people follow Karo.
Of course they do, but and they have 70 lines. I'm telling you.
The final-
Now in the state of Israel, now that the Aleppo Codex is here, now that anybody in the world can look at the Aleppo Codex, there is a tremendous controversy now in Israel. It's been going on for, as you might imagine, since this was published, which is 1976. From 1976 on, there are two opinions. There's a great machloket between Bnei Brak and Yerushalayim. One group says, scribes, we're talking about the Sofrim. One group says, you know, we've been writing Sifrei Torah for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're going to write them the same way our fathers wrote them, and our grandfathers, and our great-grandfathers, and we're not making any changes. And that includes Ashkenazim and Sfaradim. And there's another group that says, but we have the Aleppo Codex. We have what Maimonides used. We know we have the right codex. This is it. Now we have, all our doubts are answered. If you have anywhere we had a doubt about whether there's an open or a closed paragraph, large, small, whatever it may be, it's all here. And they say, I'll give you one sample where it's crucial, how you write Megillat Esther. Purim, you have to read publicly from a kosher scroll of Megillat Esther. The Shulchan Aruch rules a certain way how to write Megillat Esther, and the Shulchan Aruch says, we don't know exactly how to write Megillat Esther, so we will have the following rule with regard to open and closed paragraphs. There's only one kind in Megillat Esther, not both. The halakha today, in any scroll of Megillat Esther. But the Aleppo Codex has open and closed paragraphs. It tells you exactly where they should be. We have the Aleppo Codex. There's a whole group of very pious Jews in Israel now who are writing Megillot according to the Aleppo Codex. And now, if you want to have a controversy in your congregation, so you order an Aleppo Codex, Megillat Esther, and then you have a fist fight on Purim to see which one you're going to read from. So there's still much controversy surrounding the Aleppo Codex. Yes?
Where did Ben Asher get his traditions? I mean, my mind had...
These were handed down, presumably the Gemara already tells us that they were experts who were called Sofrim. Ezra was a Sofer. These are traditions that were passed down from generation to generation. The problem is, if you realize how huge the Bible is, and how many different... I don't know, you're familiar, and I know I had you as a student in Brooklyn College, but I don't know how well you know Hebrew or don't know Hebrew. You have the word et, and sometimes it's eight, right? There is no way of knowing whether it should be et or eight. And sometimes it's et, and sometimes it's eight. But sometimes it's vocalized with a tzera under the aleph, and sometimes it's vocalized with a segel under the aleph. This was memorized by heart. So Ben Asher knew it by heart from his father, who's memorized it, and so it was for generations. But as I told you, that's why I tried to explain at the beginning, due to persecution and so on, Jews were forgetting. They don't know, many didn't remember anymore. So what Ben Asher did is he created a college, if you like. He gathered the world's greatest experts, the greatest Balei Kriya, from everywhere in the world, gathered together in one room, and they sat down and they worked out the traditions. What are the real traditions? And is it et? When is it et? And when is it eight? When do we spell the word with above? When do we spell the word without above? And they wrote rules. They wrote notes called Masoretic notes. We have them.
So why weren't they consulted on how it was written?
I just showed you Maimonides would not write a Sefer Torah. Yeah. Well, the problem was it's very nice sitting here in an era when you can get on a plane and fly. What do you want a Jew to do from France or from Germany, or a Jew had not a penny to his name and lucky if he could survive in Krakow? And the only way he could get a perfect copy was to go to Aleppo, where he would see it for 15 minutes.
Tradition was the long tradition.
I'd like to hear, actually, if somebody, any people here from Aleppo, is 15 minutes exactly 15 minutes? You see, I was wondering what it means.
It's not 2 hours later.
Yes.
Azini, which has 67.
Sorry?
Azini.
Yes.
That should be even more important than Megillah Esther or something,
The Rambam writes, it's the halakha, if you don't write the Shirah according to the number of lines that it's supposed to be written, your Sefer Torah is pasul. You can begin to see how important. So I'm telling you, there's much discussion going on now.
Are they making new books in Israel based on new scrolls based on 67?
Some people are.
Are
Oh
they
yes,
writing-
some people are.
A simpler question would be, in the new editions of the Mishnah Torah, are they changing the 70 to
Yes,
60?
yeah. If you get yourself a brand new Mishnah Torah, if it's a critical edition or done by scholars, of course, absolutely. Not only that, just like the Aleppo Codex has now been published, that manuscript, the Huntington manuscript, has now been published. You can actually buy a photomechanical reproduction of that manuscript, and already 2 editions of Rambam have been printed very recently, which have the correct text based on the
Are those
manuscript.
the only differences?
Those familiar with Yad Pshuta, a very great rabbinic scholar, Rabbi Rabinowitz, Nachum Rabinowitz in Israel, has published a new Maimonides code, and it reads 67 lines.
Are there any other discrepancies between those chapters that were found in the original, where you have Maimonides autograph?
There are more.
Traces later? So that's not the
There are
only
more.
discrepancy?
But I have mercy on this group, and it's already late enough. You don't want to hear about more
Yes,
discrepancies.
I do.
Not tonight, not tonight.
Yes.
From time to time, you read references to something called the Damascus Codex. At the same period.
Yeah.
Is that a confusion or is it...
No, it's another code. First of all, there are several that are called, in part, it may be confusion, it may not be. I don't know. If you're referring to what's called the Damascus Code,
There is such a thing.
yeah, of course there is such a thing. The Damascus Code is a Dead Sea Scroll. That has nothing to do with anything we're talking about here. Damascus Code is a dead...
Code, but not codex.
Yeah, it's not a codex. It's a code of law. It's called the Damascus Code. It's not a codex. It's a scroll. Okay? And the Damascus Code was written about the 1st century BC. It was discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's a very important document. It's sort of the constitutional document of what's known as the Dead Sea sect. These were sectarian Jews. Nothing there has anything to do with normative halakha. And even if they would print that, and no Orthodox Jew in the world is going to change halakha on the basis of the Damascus Code. It belongs to sectarian Jews. Very different from this. Now, I thought you meant maybe a Damascus Codex. There are codices discovered in Damascus, which are Torah scrolls like the Aleppo Codex.
Same period? more or
Same
less?
period. One is from the same period. Others are much later. There are
There
several.
is a Damascus Codex. as
Yes,
well.
but what that's why I didn't know which one you meant. What most people would know about is the Damascus Code. That has nothing to do with this. But if you meant the Codex, there really is a Damascus Codex, a very important manuscript, a very early
Is that
manuscript.
really the same as this?
That's right. One of them is from the 10th century. Is that-
67 lines? As you?
No other scroll in the world. Only this one. This is it. I told you. No other scroll has 67. Now you can see also in Parker, Yosef Karo wasn't so wrong when he wrote 70 lines. Most manuscripts have 70 lines.
When you say 70 lines or 67 lines, are there any extra words? Or
No, God
same,
forbid. No.
right amount of words? It's only a question of
Any extra letter, never mind the word, extra letter in any Sefer Torah renders the Sefer Torah Cassuto. Yes.
You said about the Megillot. You said the Megillot, there were no Megillot in the Codex. So why do you say that now there's an argument between the Aleppo Codex?
Okay, very good question. Terrific. Terrific. What did I tell you? I told you in every century, starting from the 16th century, right, visitors went to Aleppo, and they recorded what they saw. Cassuto went to Aleppo and recorded what he saw, and they recorded the chapters of Megillat Esther. And they all agree. That is the chapter divisions of the Aleppo Codex. They're not the same in any way to what we have today.
Do we have any idea as to how 40% of the Aleppo Codex sort of disappeared?
I mean, we have vivid eyewitness. We have.
Together. I mean, it was
Yeah.
originally a one-bound volume, wasn't it?
It was one bound volume, very loosely bound. Very loosely bound. It was quires. So many little pamphlets, as it were, bound together and not bound properly. People who were there in the 19th century tell us that they had to put the pieces together every time they looked at it. So it wasn't bound properly, first of all.
Sloppy working.
Yeah, it wasn't bound properly. It was kept on the lock and key. And by the way, in Aleppo, there was a fire in the 19th century. In Aleppo, it was kept in a wooden box. And in our own Kodesh, that was wooden. And by a miracle, it survived that fire. And after that, in Aleppo, they brought a metal box. I think it was a steel box, but an iron box, an iron chest. And from that time on, it was always kept in a wooden box, and the wooden box was kept in an iron chest under lock and key. And nobody could see the Aleppo Codex unless two people were present, which was part of that. That's why, and at least two people were present. And there were two keys, two locks with two keys, and one person was never given both keys. So you had to have two elders of the community, as it were, present every time anybody wanted to look at the Aleppo Codex, which is not conducive for good scholarship, as you might imagine. Yes.
How long ago were the notes that Cassuto took down, and are they being published or printed?
Yeah, they're already published. They're already published and they're analyzed. They are printed. They were printed by Yosef Ofer in a magazine called Sfunot. A huge article, might be 90 pages or something. Sfunot, a scholarly periodical. It's available here in New York at Yeshiva University or at the Jewish Theological Seminary. It's on the shelves. So Sfunot, Vivrit, oh absolutely Vivrit, and they're all there. Very important notes and analyzed. It was discovered in the, I believe, the late 80s and published approximately about 1990 or so.
Are there any Tanakhs that incorporate those lines?
No. Oh, okay, that's a terrific question. We're not there yet, but we're on the way. I told you about the Mifal HaMikra, and the Mifal HaMikra did not die. That project to produce a perfect copy of the Hebrew Bible was continued after the death of Cassuto. It was then headed by Moshe Goshen Gutstein, who died a few years ago. And Israel is producing the best copy of the Bible ever produced, a critical edition, with every variant from every manuscript in the world, every variant in rabbinic literature in the world, and the text that's printed is the Aleppo Codex. Text is the Aleppo Codex, the best single Bible in the world.
Commentary is...
All right, so this is it. Here's Sefer Yirmiyahu. Now you just asked a terrific question. Are they doing it? Yes. But so far, 2.5 volumes are out. Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, Treyasar is about to come out. In your lifetime, maybe they'll finish all of them. Yes. They one more, and that's it, because we're keeping everybody late. Yes, right.
Huntington manuscript, when and where was that found, and how do we know that that's authentic?
I couldn't hear which manuscript.
The Huntington manuscript, where and when was it found, and how do we know that
Oh, also very terrific questions. It was from Aleppo. Okay? Not surprising. Now let me tell you what happened so you'll understand. A great-great-grandson of Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon left Egypt and moved to Aleppo. And he brought with him originals of the manuscripts, including Maimonides Code, the original, which God knows where it is. I don't know, maybe that burnt in Aleppo, I don't know. In any event, he moved to Aleppo and he brought with him this, what's called the Huntington manuscript. It was in Aleppo. And the Aleppo Jewish community sold it to a collector, Mr. Huntington. And Mr. Huntington donated it to Oxford University. And it was part of the Bodleian Library at Oxford University,
About when?
which is one of the world's greatest collections of Jewish manuscripts.
About when?
Since 18th or 19th century. Very late. And how do we know it's authentic? It has Maimonides' autograph.
that could be, it's a copy already, so it's chances of...
Yeah, but that's the best we can do. You know?
Do we have any other...
If you have a manuscript that has, the only one in the world that has Maimonides' autograph on it, and Rambam, the only one, and Rambam writes, Hugam Misifri. This is, Rambam attests this was corrected against my original. And that should be enough for anybody. But if that didn't satisfy you, even what you heard tonight should satisfy you. When we know that the Aleppo Codex has 67 lines, when we know that the Rambam said he used it, and the whole world, and Cassuto thought he didn't, and now we find that it actually says 67. Exactly what I would have expected, if you really want to know, in a Maimonides manuscript. There's no question about it. And you see, you just heard one line, right? I spend a lot of time studying that whole Huntington manuscript. There are 100 places where the printed text makes no sense, and where the manuscript is perfectly clear. That's what Maimonides really did. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you.